Hello, it's good to have this time together. Let's sit with that quote for a moment. It is, in many ways, the skeleton key to one of the most turbulent chapters in modern British history. A chapter that was never really about palace budgets, press leaks, or even the decision of a prince and his wife to seek a quieter life. It was, as that statement lays bare, about something far more elemental: control. When a source told Byline Chimes that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had to be safely in the tent in Britain or cast away and castigated as comprehensively as possible, they were not describing a family disagreement. They were describing a binary choice presented by an ancient institution to two people who had committed the unpardonable sin of becoming more luminous than the structure that housed them. This is the context often missing from the frenzy. For years, the headlines screamed about Megxit, about tears, about privacy, about a sad little man, as Prince Harry so memorably described Dan Wootton. But beneath the tabloid noise was a quiet, determined campaign to force a family back into a system that could no longer contain them. And when that failed, to ensure they were so thoroughly vilified that no other member of the family would ever dare to follow their lead. To understand what Harry and Meghan actually did, we must first understand what they were up against. And when we look at it clearly, what emerges is not a story of petulance or privilege, but one of extraordinary courage, strategic clarity, and a love so unwavering that it was willing to shatter a monarchy's carefully managed media machinery. The story begins, as these stories often do, in the shadow world of palace press operations. For decades, the British monarchy has maintained its relevance not through divine right, but through a transactional relationship with the tabloid press. As one source in the Byline Times investigation put it, the royal family is doing deals and trades with the press all the time for favorable coverage and protection and to maintain public relevance. This was the system Harry and Meghan were born into, or in Meghan's case, married into. It was a system where royal aides, each with their own allegiances to different princes and their households, would spoon-feed stories to editors at the Mail, the Sun, and the Times in exchange for positive coverage and, just as importantly, the burying of scandals. It was a closed loop. The press got access, the palace got control. Then came the rupture. In August 2019, while Meghan was navigating the relentless pressures of new motherhood in public scrutiny, something was happening behind the scenes at Rupert Murdoch's The Sun. According to the 3-year investigation by Byline Times, journalist Dan Wootton was orchestrating payments to the partner of Christian Jones, a top Kensington Palace press secretary. The payments, totaling £4,000, were allegedly for stories about the Sussexes, including details about nannies, godparents, and, eventually, the most sensitive document of all, Prince Harry's private, confidential letter to his father outlining their future plans. This was not journalism. It was a breach of the palace's own ecosystem. But the palace's reaction was not to root out the corruption, it was to protect the system from exposure. When an anonymous whistleblower came forward with detailed testimony, including the internal News UK accounting code for the payments, Prince Harry saw an opportunity to finally get to the bottom of how his family's most intimate details were ending up on front pages. He was, according to sources, very keen to get to the bottom of it all. He wanted accountability. He wanted to break the cycle of leaks and smears that had made his wife's life unbearable. But the institution had other ideas. Simon Case, then private secretary to Prince William, was tasked with investigating the allegations against Christian Jones. He cleared Jones after hearing his denial. But the Sussexes and their legal team had access to the whistleblower testimony, the detailed accounting codes, the specific payment amounts. They believed there was a case to answer. In May 2020, as the couple was trying to negotiate their 12-month Sanding Ram Agreement trial period, splitting their time between the UK and Canada, they included Christian Jones's name in a legal letter before action to the Sun. It was a standard legal step, but it was also a grenade. Naming Jones threatened to pull back the curtain on the entire unethical relationship between the palace and the tabloids. According to Byline Times, senior palace figures, including Prince Charles's private secretary Sir Clive Alderton and the Lord Chamberlain Lord Peel, urged Prince Harry to remove Jones's name. They argued it was a matter of institutional protection. Harry refused. He had been stung too many times. He had watched his wife be subjected to a campaign of press vitriol that had, as he would later reveal in the documentary Harry and Meghan, been fueled by the very palace aides who were supposed to protect them. He knew that Wootton's January 2020 front-page scoop about Megxit, which triggered a constitutional firestorm and wrongly claimed he had blindsided the Queen, contained a telling detail that could only have come from someone with access to his private, confidential correspondence with his father. For Harry, this was no longer about palace politics. It was about protecting his family. It was about ensuring that the leaks stopped. It was about principle. The response from Clarence House was swift and devastating. King Charles, then the Prince of Wales, withdrew his £700,000 funding commitment for the Sussexes' transition. The decision was announced in late June 2020, just 3 months into the 12-month trial period. On the surface, it was presented as a financial decision, but sources close to the matter have been explicit. It was retaliation. They threatened the removal of the funding to try and protect the royal household from a potential courtroom scandal with Jones and Wootton very publicly at the center, one well-placed source told Byline Times. The actual removal of the funding weeks later was about control and designed to force Harry and Meghan to come back to the senior royal family in the UK, where their security would be assured. Let us sit with the implications of that. The father withdrew funding from his son, funding that covered the £3 million a year security costs for a family with 2 young children, not because of a budget shortfall, not because of a disagreement over royal duties, but to prevent a press secretary from being named in a legal document that might expose the monarchy's cozy, corrupt relationship with the tabloids. The message was unmistakable. The institution would protect its own, its aides, its secrets, its system of control, even if it meant abandoning a son, a daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren to the wolves. Harry and Meghan were forced into commercial arrangements to pay for their own security. They had to sign deals with Netflix and Spotify, deals that would later be used against them as proof of their supposed commercialization of royalty. But the truth was simpler. They had been defunded by a father who chose the reputation of a press secretary over the safety of his son's family. The funding withdrawal was not an isolated act. It was part of a broader strategy to ensure that the Sussexes' trial period failed. As one source told Byline Times, senior members of the family wanted them back after the transition period and were ready to continue playing dirty to make this happen. They never thought the trial period would work and tried everything to make it fail. This meant the removal of security. It meant signing off on what the source described as a 12-month assault by the UK press on Harry and Meghan and everyone in their orbit. It meant allowing a narrative to take hold, one that persists to this day, that the Sussexes were difficult, demanding, and ungrateful. And at the center of that narrative was Dan Wootton. After his allegiance shifted from Prince William to the Sussexes in the summer of 2019, Wootton became the primary vehicle for negative coverage. Day after day, The Sun ran front-page stories casting Meghan as a bully, Harry as a hostage, and their departure as a betrayal of the Queen. These stories were not organic. They were fed, nurtured, and amplified. When Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021, they revealed the human cost of this machinery. Meghan spoke of not wanting to be alive anymore. Harry spoke of his family cutting him off financially and emotionally. They named the racism, the lack of support, the lies. But even then, the institution's response was to circle the wagons. The palace issued a statement noting that recollections may vary, a phrase that has since become a chilling epitaph for a family that values institutional preservation over human truth. What Harry and Meghan did was unprecedented. No senior royal had ever voluntarily walked away from the institution and built an independent life. They did it without a roadmap, without institutional support, and under the full glare of a hostile press determined to make them fail. But they did not fail. They built a production company, Arkwell, that has told stories of resilience and hope. They continued their philanthropic work. They raised their children, Archie and Lilibet, in an environment of love rather than institutional expectation. They spoke their truth, not once, but multiple times, each time at great personal cost because they understood that silence was the very mechanism that allowed the system to persist. In Spare, Harry wrote about Dan Wootton as a sad little man. It was a rare moment of public disdain from a prince who had been trained to never complain, never explain. But Harry had moved past the training. He had seen how the machine worked, how his private letter to his father had been leaked, how his wife had been sacrificed on the altar of tabloid circulation figures, how his own father had chosen to protect a press secretary rather than his son. And he made a choice. He chose his wife. He chose his children. He chose a life outside the tent. The Byline Times investigation is significant, not because it reveals new scandals, but because it confirms what many suspected all along. The Sussexes were not fleeing the monarchy. They were fleeing a corrupt system within the monarchy. They were not Megxit instigators. They were victims of a coordinated campaign to force them back into a system that had already proven it would not protect them. The investigation also reveals the profound moral bankruptcy of an institution that would rather protect a press secretary with alleged ties to tabloid payments than support a son who had served his country in the military, who had dedicated his life to charitable causes, who had simply asked for his family to be safe. The decision to withdraw funding was not about money. It was about sending a message to anyone who might ever consider prioritizing their own family over the institution. And the message was clear. Step out of line and we will cut you off. We will let the press destroy you. We will cast you away and castigate you so thoroughly that no one will ever dare follow your path. But here is the remarkable thing. Harry and Meghan are still standing. They have built a life in California that is filled with purpose. They have continued their charitable work, from supporting Ukrainian refugees to advocating for vaccine equity. They have spoken out against disinformation and for mental health awareness. They have raised their children away from the firm, but they have not abandoned their values. And they have, through their actions, exposed the monarchy's greatest weakness: its addiction to control. The system could not tolerate the Sussexes being out of the control of the institution and dominating the media narrative, as one source put it. So it tried to destroy them. But in trying to destroy them, it revealed itself. What Harry and Meghan represent is a fundamental challenge to the idea of what royalty should be. They showed that a member of the royal family could be popular not because of proximity to the throne, but because of authenticity. They showed that a royal marriage could be based on genuine partnership rather than dynastic duty. They showed that it was possible to say no to a system that demanded everything and gave nothing in return, except a carefully managed public image. And they showed that the British press, so long accustomed to being the palace's willing accomplice, could be held accountable. The phone hacking scandals, the Byline Times investigation, the ongoing legal battles, all of these are part of a slow, grinding effort to expose the rot at the heart of the relationship between the media and the monarchy. The Sussexes' decision to step back was never about escaping duty. It was about redefining it. Harry has spoken repeatedly about his love for the Commonwealth, his commitment to service, his desire to continue the work his mother began. But he realized, painfully, belatedly, that he could not do that work while trapped in a system that saw him and his wife as threats to be neutralized. In the years since they left, the narrative has been relentlessly shaped by those who wanted them to fail. Every commercial deal has been scrutinized, every public appearance has been dissected. Their children's titles, their use of the Sussex brand, their security arrangements, all have been used as weapons to suggest that they wanted the benefits of royalty without the responsibilities. But the Byline Times investigation cuts through that noise. It shows with documentary evidence and detailed sourcing that the Sussexes were not the architects of the split. They were responding to a system that was already broken. They were demanding accountability for leaks that should never have happened. And they were punished for it, financially, emotionally, reputationally, by an institution that valued its own secrecy above all else. The quote that began this piece, the Sussexes had either to be safely in the tent in Britain or cast away and castigated as comprehensively as possible, is a confession. It is an admission that the monarchy saw Harry and Meghan not as family, but as a threat to be managed. And when management failed, destruction was the only remaining option. But destruction did not come. Or rather, it came, but it did not stick. Harry and Meghan are not destroyed. They are not cast away in the sense the palace intended. They have built something new, not a rival monarchy, but a modern model of public service that does not require subservience to a broken system. They have shown that it is possible to walk away from a gilded cage and still find purpose. They have shown that love, real, uncompromising, partnership-based love, can be a more powerful force than centuries of tradition. They have shown that telling the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is the only path to genuine freedom. So let us remember what actually happened. In 2019, a journalist was allegedly paying a palace aide's partner for confidential information about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. When the Sussexes tried to hold those responsible accountable, the palace circled the wagons. When Harry refused to back down, his father withdrew funding. When the couple tried to negotiate a new role, the institution decided that they could not be allowed to succeed outside the tent. And when they left anyway, the palace signed off on a year-long press assault designed to ensure that no one would ever follow them. This is not the story of a couple who chose to leave a family. It is the story of a family that chose to protect its secrets over its own flesh and blood. And through it all, Harry and Meghan have held their heads high. They have raised their children with love. They have continued to serve. They have told their truth. And they have shown millions of people around the world, people trapped in their own dysfunctional systems, their own impossible choices, that there is life outside the tent, that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away. That is not the story of a Megxit. That is the story of a liberation. And it is one that will be told and retold for generations to come.